Assalamualaikum dan salam sejahtera. Anda bersama saya Nina Rozman dan ini Niaga AWANI. Seperti biasa, jam ini kami akan bawakan pelbagai perkembangan terkini niaga, ekonomi dan pasaran bersama ahli panel jemputan selama 1 jam 30 minit untuk anda fahami lebih mendalam bagaimanakah lanskap ekonomi semasa dan bagaimanakah unjuran bergerak ke hadapan. Dan pada pagi ini untuk saya mulakan dengan beberapa data ataupun laporan daripada Jabatan Perangkaan Malaysia DOSM yang telah berkongsikan antara data pembuatan, pengeluaran perindustrian termasuk juga dengan IHPR yang mana saya akan mulakan dengan indeks harga pengeluaran perkhidmatan IHPRP untuk kita saksikan bagaimanakah prestasinya setakat setakat pada bulan Disember 2023. Kalau boleh anda lihat di sini untuk kita saksikan iaitu bagaimanakah prestasinya pada suku keempat 2023 seperti yang telah dikongsikan oleh Jabatan Perangkaan Malaysia menunjukkan peningkatan kepada 1.0% suku keempat 2023, peningkatan sebanyak 1% daripada tahun ke tahun. So tentu ini adalah peningkatan berbanding 1.4% yang telah dicatatkan pada suku sebelumnya pada tahun 2023. Dan menurut Jabatan Perangkaan Malaysia DOSM dalam satu pernyataan berkata kebanyakan subsektor merekodkan peningkatan harga pada suku tahun ini dan Ketua Perangkaan Datuk Seri Dr. Muhammad Uzi Mahidin berkata juga subsektor yang anda dapat saksikan di sini adalah subsektor kesenian, hiburan, tujuh rekreasi adalah peningkatan paling tinggi pada pada suku keempat 2023 dengan mencatatkan peningkatan sebanyak 5.5%, diikuti juga dengan peningkatan yang tertinggi dari penginapan dan aktiviti perkhidmatan makanan dan juga minuman sebanyak 3.4%. Dan ini adalah dua subsektor mempunyai peningkatan yang tertinggi. Antara peningkatan yang kita dapat saksikan ini adalah disebabkan kenaikan dalam aktiviti perkhidmatan minuman 4% dan restoran serta aktiviti perkhidmatan makanan yang bergerak kepada 3.8%. Dan pada masa sama Muhammad Uzi berkata juga subsektor lain yang mencatatkan kenaikan adalah juga pendidikan sebanyak 1.0%, profesional 0.2%, kesihatan 0.3% dan aktiviti hartanah sebanyak 0.6%. Dan antara satu subsektor sahaja yang mengalami penurunan penyusutan adalah pengangkutan yang mencatatkan sebanyak negatif 0.5% pada suku keempat 2023. Dan ini adalah antara data IHPR yang anda dapat saksikan setakat ini. Manakala kalau saya tambah sikit, maklumat dan komunikasi subsektor tidak mengalami apa-apa perubahan. Dan saya akan teruskan perkongsian data-data yang telah dikongsikan oleh DOSM untuk kita saksikan bagaimanakah perangkaan pembuatan prestasinya pada bulan Disember 2023 tahun lepas. Dan ini adalah prestasi yang dapat kita saksikan daripada November 2022 sehinggalah Disember 2023 tahun lepas yang mencatatkan penurunan nilai jualan sebanyak 4.2% kepada 149.9 bilion ringgit. Ini yang prestasi yang dapat kita saksikan setakat Disember 2023 mengenai sektor pembuatan. Seterusnya antara iaitu kalau kita dapat saksikan penurunan daripada sektor ini disebabkan oleh penurunan paling tinggi oleh subsektor petroleum, kimia, getah dan plastik yang menyumbang penurunan kepada 13.6% kepada sektor pembuatan, diikuti juga dengan sektor produk elektrik dan elektronik mencatatkan penurunan pada bulan Disember sebanyak 4.6%, termasuk juga dengan makanan dan minuman tembakau mengalami penurunan sebanyak 2.6%. Seterusnya untuk kita saksikan iaitu industri berorientasikan domestik dan ekspor. Di sini terbagi kepada dua. Industri berorientasikan ekspor mengambil jumlah daripada jumlah jualan yang tertinggi dengan mencecah hampir 70%. Dengan industri berorientasikan domestik sebanyak 30.8% daripada nilai jualan pembuatan yang mengikut industri. Namun prestasi industri berorientasikan ekspor mencatatkan penurunan sebanyak 8.4% pada Disember 2023, diikuti juga dengan iaitu industri berorientasikan domestik juga mencatatkan penurunan pada Disember tahun lepas kepada 6.7%. Seterusnya untuk kita lihat bilangan pekerja, gaji dan upah jualan per pekerja iaitu prestasinya dalam tempoh setahun. Di sini pekerja daripada Disember 2022 mencatatkan 2.34 juta. Namun selepas tahun itu masuk November 2023 ia meningkat sedikit kepada 2.38 juta dan turun sedikit sebulan selepas itu Disember 2023 kepada 2.3 juta orang pekerja yang telah dicatatkan pada iaitu prestasi terkini. Manakala gaji dan upah kita dapat dapat saksikan peningkatan daripada Disember 2022 sehinggalah Disember 2023. Dalam masa tempoh setahun ia telah meningkat kepada 8.74 bilion ringgit kepada 2.1% peningkatan. Manakala jualan per pekerja kita dapat saksikan daripada Disember 2022 mencatatkan 67.0 sebanyak 5.2%. Namun setahun selepas itu pada Disember 2023 telah merekodkan penurunan daripada segi jualan per pekerja kepada 63.1 ribu, penurunan sebanyak 5.8%. Selain itu, nilai jualan sektor pembuatan untuk kita saksikan prestasinya daripada suku ketiga 2022 sehinggalah suku keempat pada tahun 2023. Sudah tentu kita dapat saksikan penurunan. Ini adalah fasa iaitu fasa pemulihan daripada pandemik yang telah mencatatkan sebanyak 22.5% sehinggalah kita dapat saksikan prestasi suku ke suku mengalami penurunan sehinggalah yang terendah yang dicatatkan pada suku keempat 2023, penurunan sebanyak 2.7% yang dicatatkan dalam sektor pembuatan kalau kita dapat saksikan prestasinya daripada suku ke suku. Manakala nilai jualan sektor pembuatan untuk kita saksikan dalam tempoh 3 tahun daripada tahun pandemik COVID-19 sudah tentu prestasinya lemah dengan merosot sebanyak 2.1%. Namun masuk fasa pemulihan, sektor pembuatan mengalami iaitu pemulihan sedikit, telah meningkat kepada 5.5% dan teruskan momentum positif sehinggalah tahun 2022 mencatatkan sedikit peningkatan kepada 15.8%. Namun jatuh semula ke tahap antara yang terendah pada tahun 2023 kepada 0.2%. Dan ini adalah prestasi untuk kita saksikan bagi sektor pembuatan mengikut tahun ke tahun daripada tahun pandemik COVID-19. So tentu ini adalah antara data yang saya kongsikan dan saya akan tambah lagi beberapa data untuk kita saksikan bagaimanakah indeks pengeluaran perindustrian Malaysia yang direkodkan pada tahun 2023. Permulaannya untuk kita saksikan IPP secara ringkas pada prestasinya daripada November hinggalah Disember 2022 sehinggalah Disember 2023. Kita dapat lihat iaitu mendata keputusannya kecuali pada 2022 iaitu pada bulan April penurunan terhadap prestasi indeks pengeluaran perindustrian namun bangkit semula. Daripada Mei sehinggalah Disember 2023, antara prestasi yang terkini kita dapat saksikan indeks pengeluaran perindustrian telah mencatatkan penurunan kepada 1.3%. Dan ini adalah prestasi IPP yang dapat kita saksikan yang setakat ini pada bulan Disember. Tapi kalau indeks pengeluaran perindustrian mengikut sektor, kita nak lihat apakah antara subsektor yang memberi sumbangan dan apakah yang menyebabkan penyusutan. Pelombongan mencatatkan peningkatan pada Disember 3.6%. Sudah tentu ia telah menyumbang kepada peningkatan perindustrian termasuk juga dengan subsektor elektrik iaitu meningkat pada Disember 4.6%. Namun hanya satu sektor yang menyebabkan penurunan kepada perindustrian kita adalah disebabkan subsektor pembuatan yang telah mencatatkan penurunan sebanyak 1.4% pada Disember 2023. Seterusnya untuk sektor pembuatan antara subsektor yang menyebabkan penyusutan kepada pengeluaran perindustrian adalah daripada subsektor elektrik dan elektronik yang telah mencatatkan sebanyak penurunan 6.8% iaitu penyusutan yang lebih tinggi berbanding November 2023 diikuti juga dengan iaitu petroleum kimia getah dan plastik mencatatkan penurunan terhadap sektor perbuatan. Seterusnya antara sektor pelombongan yang didorong oleh minyak mentah dan kondensat juga mencatatkan peningkatan namun ia sedikit rendah berbanding November 2023 di mana ia telah dicatatkan 1.6% pada bulan Disember. Manakala gas asli juga mencatatkan peningkatan yang lebih tinggi berbanding November kepada 5.0% dan antara ekspor versus domestik, ekspor industri berorientasikan ekspor telah mengalami penurunan daripada November hingga ke Disember jatuh kepada 4.1%. Namun industri berorientasikan domestik masih mengekalkan momentum positif dengan peningkatan sebanyak 4.2% dan indeks pengeluaran perindustrian yang dapat kita saksikan daripada tahun-tahun pra-pandemik sehinggalah tahun 2023 pasca pandemik ini kita dapat saksikan daripada 2016 hingga 2019 dalam tempoh 4 tahun prestasi kita kekal dalam keadaan positif 4.1%, 3.2%. Namun masuk tahun 2020 sudah tentu ekonomi kita memang terjejas. Kita dapat saksikan iaitu prestasi pengeluaran perindustrian mengalami penyusutan kepada 4.1%. Namun ia meningkat semula pada waktu pemulihan 2021 7.4% dan kita cuba mengekalkan momentum positif pada tahun 2022 dengan mencatatkan sedikit peningkatan kepada 6.7%. Namun 2023 kita mengalami kejatuhan kepada pengeluaran perindustrian kepada 0.9%. Dan kalau kita lihat perbandingan daripada tahun 2022 hingga 2023, sektor pengeluaran perindustrian kita mengalami penurunan daripada 6.7% sehinggalah 0.9%. Dan indeks pengeluaran perindustrian ini adalah prestasi daripada suku ke suku daripada tahun 2022 sehinggalah suku keempat 2023. Dan ini adalah antara prestasi yang dapat saya kongsikan daripada sektor pembuatan, sektor iaitu IHPR dan termasuk jelah pengeluaran perindustrian yang dapat kita saksikan untuk suku keempat 2023 dan pada bulan Disember 2023. Dan sudah bersedia dalam talian untuk mengulas lebih lanjut adalah Profesor Emeritus Datuk Dr. Zakaria Abdul Rashid, merupakan penganalisis ekonomi. Saya nak ucapkan terima kasih Prof kerana sudi meluangkan masa bersama kami, dan menurut antara data yang telah saya kongsikan sebentar saja tadi, pengeluaran perindustrian seperti yang kita dapat saksikan, Dawson telah kongsi ia menyusut 0.1% pada Disember tahun lepas. Ini dipengaruhi oleh sektor pembuatan. Pandangan Prof, apakah reaksi awal Prof terhadap prestasi ini?
Baik, terima kasih banyak Nina. IPP ataupun indeks pengeluaran perindustrian ini, dia sebenarnya satu indeks yang mengesani perubahan bulanan, dan tapi kemudiannya dikira untuk tahunan dan juga untuk sukuan. Dia mengesani aktiviti pengeluaran, dan dalam indeks ini dia ada sub-indices dia, iaitu bagi perlumbungan, pembuatan dan juga elektrisiti. Elektrisiti ni makna bekalan elektrik kepada pengguna-penggunanya. Cuma kita nak lebih untuk faham, iaitu daripada ketiga-tiga sub indices ini, saya ulang lagi, perlumbungan, pembuatan dan bekalan elektrik, jadi yang paling besar sekali ialah pembuatan. Kita pun tahu dia sektor ekonomi begitu. Jadi daripada ini kita boleh menerangkan perubahan di dalam aktiviti pengeluaran output. Sama ada output kita ni semakin meningkat ataupun semakin berkurangan ataupun tidak berubah gitu. Jadi kita track dia, kita lihat dia daripada IPP ini. Dan indeks ini kalau kita dapati bahawa dari segi data yang dibekalkan oleh Jabatan Perangkaan, dia kelihatan meningkat sejak April 2023. Sejak April 2023 kalau kita ambil bulan demi bulan tu, dengan kadar yang agak stabil. Maknanya dia punya rate of growth-nya masih lagi positif, maknanya dia meningkat. Tetapi yang menjadi menariknya sini ialah 2 bulan kebelakangan ini, iaitu bulan November dan bulan Disember. Maksud saya kebelakangan ini ialah bulan November dan bulan Disember 2023 tu, dia telah indeks ini telah mula merosot. Jadi ini menunjukkan aktiviti pengeluaran output di Malaysia semakin lemah. Dan kita lihat bahawa kemerosotan indeks ini dikesan daripada tiga sub-indices itu, dia yang dikesan jatuhnya ialah dalam indeks pembuatan. Sub-indeks pembuatan. Sub-indeks pembuatan ini saya kata tadi adalah antara yang terbesar sekali. Iaitu ia mula jatuh dia jatuh 2 bulan berturut-turut. Yang itu yang seperti Nina sebutkan tadi juga, iaitu pada bulan November 6% lebih tadi. Kemudiannya dia turun pada 6.8% dia jatuh. Indeks dia jatuh, maknanya negatif tu. Kemudiannya pada bulan Disember 2023 pun jatuh lagi, makin besar lagi. Iaitu lebih kurang sama, lebih kurang 6.7%. Jadi dua bulan berturut-turut, dan ini yang menyebabkan indeks IPP jatuh. Dan kejatuhan bulan Disember ini kelihatan semenampaknya semakin besar, dan ini adalah perkara yang menarik bagi kita dan perlu kita pantau secara rapi. Dan kalau kita lihat sedang sub-indices yang dua lagi, iaitu pelombongan dan bekalan elektrik, masih lagi positif. Maknanya lagi masih indeks masih berkembang, mana output dia masih berkembang lagi. Output bagi bekalan elektrik dan juga bagi pelombongan masih positif lagi. Dan mana saya persilakan tadi, daripada ketiga-tiga indices ini, indeks indeks pembuatan merupakan indeks yang terbesar sekali. Kejatuhan sub-indeks pembuatan ini dikesani berlaku seperti apa yang Nina katakan tadi, terdapat di dalam pembuatan yang berorientasikan ekspor. Pembuatan yang berorientasikan ekspor. Dan kalau kita lihat dalam ini, kebanyakannya ialah E&E, electrical and electronic product ni. Dan ada juga yang berlaku di dalam barangan petroleum dan tekstil pun berlaku juga. Dan ini semua adalah export oriented industries. Dan lebih membimbangkan bagi saya rasa sektor E&E, elektronik dan electrical product ini. Kerana saya katakan dia merupakan ekspor terbesar negara. Dan yang ini mengalami kemerosotan, dan saya katakan tadi ialah sejak 2 bulan berturut-turut, November, Disember. Sub-indeks pembuatan juga kelihatan mula merosot pada bulan Disember bersama-sama dengan sub-indeks tekstil dan barangan petroleum. Ini semuanya ialah export oriented industry. Bagi sub-indeks IPP berorientasikan ekspor, saya kata tadi dia jatuh, tapi yang sub-indeks yang IPP yang berorientasikan domestic demand oriented, dia masih kukuh lagi. Jadi bermakna pengeluaran output kita sekarang ini memang jelas sekali didorong oleh kekukuhan permintaan domestik dan juga dicabar oleh kelemahan di dalam permintaan ekspor. Dan pada keseluruhannya IPP merosot. Gitu. Ya.
Prof, tadi Prof ada katakan bahawa 2 bulan berturut-turut menyusut. Apakah antara faktor yang memberi sumbangan kepada kemerosotan ini? Adakah juga mungkin disebabkan oleh faktor luaran, dan bagaimana penurunan 2 bulan berturut-turut ini memberi kesan kepada keseluruhan ekonomi?
Itulah seperti saya katakan tadi, kita ni industri berorientasikan ekspor, khususnya E&E. Dan E&E ini merupakan ekspor terbesar negara. Dan ini sangat-sangat membimbangkan. Dan tentunya kerana saya katakan tadi dia merupakan ekspor oriented, dan E&E yang kita keluarkan semua kebanyakannya adalah untuk diekspor keluar negara, dan tentunya apabila berlaku kelembapan di dalam pasaran ekspor dunia, iaitu negara-negara yang mengimport barangan elektronik dan electrical product daripada kita, bila mereka lemah, permintaan mereka lemah, maka order kurang, maka mesej itu dapat kepada kita, makna kilang-kilang kita telah menerima orders yang semakin berkurangan. Jadi dia akan kilang-kilang akan buat adjustment. Dia ada kilang-kilang ni dia ada buat inventory. Jadi kalau inventory yang ada sekarang ni ada digunakan dulu, tapi kalau katakan indeks ini terus-terusan jatuh sedemikian, order habis dan dia terpaksa mengurangkan production. Bila mengurangkan production, kilang terpaksa mengecilkan operasi, dan kita tak mahulah perkara yang seburuk ini berlaku, iaitu mungkin juga kalau teruk sangat dia boleh berlaku redundancy, iaitu pembuangan pekerja. Tapi saya katakan ini belum berlaku lagi, tetapi kita harus pantaunya secara rapi, secara rapat, supaya bila perkara itu berlaku, kalau perkara itu berlaku, jadi kita telah bersedia dengan keadaan yang buruk sedemikian. Jadi tadi Nina tanya apa kesan dia, saya rasa kesan dia kalau keadaan terlalu gawat sekali di luar sana, kita terpaksa mengecilkan pengeluaran kita, E&E itu khususnya, dan tekstil dan juga petroleum product tadi, kita terpaksa mengecilkannya, dan mungkin boleh berlaku pemberhentian pekerja. Ini kalau keadaan yang senario yang buruk berlaku gitu. Jadi kita kena bersedia.
Jadi apakah antara strategi penambahbaikan yang diperlukan dalam perancangan maupun pelaksanaan dasar serta melibatkan peneraju industri dalam menangani cabaran ini?
Dia dalam bila kita cakap tentang perancangan dasar, dia adalah perkara jangka panjang. Apa yang berlaku sekarang ni ialah cyclical factor di dalam global economy, iaitu kita pun tahu keadaan ekonomi dunia yang tidak menentu, keadaan di Eropah, keadaan di Amerika, keadaan di China yang tidak menentu gini kan tapi alhamdulillah di ASEAN masih kukuh lagi. Namun demikian, kita ni adalah sebagai sebuah negara kecil yang berorientasikan ekspor. Kita ni punya ekspor trade penetration kita lebih pada 180%. Jadi bermakna pertumbuhan ekonomi kita memang bergantung kepada ekspor demand. Jadi Nina tanya apa yang patut kita lakukan. Yang ini dah kita kesani lama dulu, iaitu kita tidak boleh berterusan bergantung kepada ekspor demand untuk drive growth kita. Dan kita perlu mengukuhkan industri domestik dengan mengukuhkan teknologi, dengan mengukuhkan rantaian antara industri. Bermakna apabila kita mengeluarkan electrical product, jadi kita mengeluarkan palm oil kita dan biarkan permintaan itu dijana oleh oleh industri-industri tempatan dulu, supaya ini pun bagus juga bila peningkatan di dalam rangkaian industri. Jadi makna kita boleh menjana nilai tambah tempatan, nilai tambah domestik yang lebih kukuh lagi. Satu lagi macam contohnya saya katakan tadi, electrical product. Sebenarnya electrical product merupakan ekspor terbesar kita, tetapi nilai tambah tempatan, nilai tambah domestik dalam E&E produk antara yang terendah. Nina tahu tak? Jadi ini sebenarnya kita mengekspor E&E, tetapi nilai tambah ini yang menjana pertumbuhan ekonomi. Nilai tambah ini sebenarnya yang menjana buruh yang mahir atau tidak. Jadi kerana nilai tambah rendah, maka buruhnya adalah buruh yang kurang mahir. Dan juga potensi untuk menjana pertumbuhan pun adalah agak rendah. Jadi dari segi dasarnya, kita mesti yang saya katakan tadi mengukuhkan teknologi, mengukuhkan rangkaian antara industri kita supaya lebih kukuh lagi. Dan ini adalah sebagai salah satu daripada structural reform yang sangat-sangat perlu dilakukan dalam bidang pengeluaran. Itu ya, Nina.
Baik, seperti yang Prof kongsikan, antara impak daripada penjusutan daripada sektor pembuatan ini akan memberi kesan terhadap pengurangan pengeluaran perindustrian. Oleh itu kita harus kukuhkan daya saing kita dengan menerapkan teknologi dan juga digital inovasi dalam menambah baik dan mengukuhkan lagi iaitu usaha dan sumbangan terhadap sektor perindustrian terutama. Sekali lagi saya nak ucapkan terima kasih kepada Profesor Emeritus Datuk Dr. Zakaria Abdul Rashid merupakan penganalisis ekonomi, dan semua perbincangan ini akan kami rangkumkan dalam AWANI.com. Dan jangan ke mana, kita akan berhenti seketika dan kembali selepas ini.
Dry skin is more than uncomfortable. It needs to be repaired. Repair with Raskin. Repairs and restores. For soothed, moisturized skin. Repair dry skin with Raskin.
Betul semua tu. Dan lebih lagi.
Gelombang keempat monsun timur laut kini beralih ke selatan tanah air dengan keadaan banjir di Johor semakin meningkat.
Ekonomi Malaysia dijangka berkembang 4.5% pada 2024 dan 4.6% pada tahun hadapan.
Seorang pelajar tingkatan 5 diculik sebelum dikurung, bekas teman lelakinya dikepung.
Tiada laporan rakyat Malaysia terjejas dalam tragedi pengeboman di Kerman Cemetery.
Bertemu kembali, kita akan teruskan dengan laporan seterusnya dengan Redtone Digital Berhad milik Tan Sri Vincent Tan berjaya memperoleh kontrak perkhidmatan komunikasi bernilai RM398.1 juta daripada kerajaan. Kumpulan itu menerusi Redtone Engineering dan Network Services sedang Berhad meraih kontrak MyGovUC 3.0 selama 60 bulan daripada unit pemodenan takbiran dan perancangan pengurusan Malaysia mampu.
Katanya kontrak itu meliputi komunikasi bersatu kerajaan termasuk sistem mail elektronik, sistem kalender, persidangan audio dan video, ruang bicara, pengurusan direktori ditambah dengan pengurusan perubahan termasuk latihan pengguna. Ia juga merangkumi sokongan perisian, pusat operasi keselamatan, pusat operasi rangkaian dan meja bantuan yang meliputi pengurusan keselamatan maklumat. Kumpulan itu menerima surat tawaran kontrak itu semalam dengan tarikh kontrak bermula pada 1 Februari 2024. Kontrak ini tidak akan memberi sebarang kesan kepada modal saham terbitan dan pegangan saham pemegang saham utama Redtone serta sebarang kesan material ke atas aset bersih, pendapatan dan pada paras hutang kumpulan bagi tahun kewangan semasa berakhir 30 Jun 2024. Katanya kontrak itu dijangka menyumbang secara positif kepada pendapatan masa depan kumpulan Redtone. Malah, tiada pengarah atau pemegang saham utama Redtone dan atau orang yang berkaitan mempunyai sebarang kepentingan secara langsung atau tidak langsung dalam kontrak itu. Redtone dimiliki 40.8% oleh Berjaya Corp Berhad dengan Vincent adalah pemegang saham tunggal terbesar.
Persatuan Takaful Malaysia MTA sedang meningkatkan usahanya untuk menembus baki 40% rakyat Malaysia yang tiada perlindungan takaful. Kebanyakannya adalah daripada kumpulan pendapatan B40 dan M40. Ketua Pegawai Eksekutif MTA Muhammad Razwan Muhammad berkata, untuk mencapainya, MTA telah menyediakan pelbagai inisiatif termasuk program-program rangka tindakan sektor kewangan FSB takaful.
Program FSB dibangunkan untuk memudahkan pertumbuhan industri takaful dan merupakan hasil daripada penyelarasan Pelan Tindakan Sektor Kewangan 2022-2026 Bank Negara Malaysia BNM dan Pelan Hala 7 Pengantaraan berasaskan nilai untuk takaful VBIT. Beliau berkata MTA juga telah melancarkan Pelan Strategik Hijrah 2027 bertujuan untuk meningkatkan pasaran takaful dan kadar penembusan di Malaysia daripada 20.1% pada 2022. Sehubungan itu, dalam program 4 tahun ini, pihaknya ingin melihat semua aspek. Salah satunya ialah bagaimana MTA akan mewujudkan persekitaran yang sangat kondusif untuk industri takaful beroperasi. Selain itu, Muhammad Razwan berkata peserta takaful juga sedang mengkaji inisiatif pengembangan pasaran dengan bekerjasama dengan pengawal selia untuk memajukan takaful di peringkat tempatan dan antarabangsa. Beliau berkata industri juga sedang mempertimbangkan model takaful gabungan untuk mencapai sasaran yang ditetapkan untuk industri. Jelasnya ia bukan sahaja akan menjadikan mampan tetapi juga mempunyai pendekatan dermawan sama ada melalui zakat atau wakaf. Menurutnya, program takaful FSB memberi tumpuan untuk memastikan kemampanan, kestabilan dan pertumbuhan berterusan industri. Program itu di peringkat awal telah mencapai kemajuan yang ketara seperti yang ditunjukkan dalam laporan interim. Kejayaan program berkenaan adalah disebabkan oleh 5 tonggak utama iaitu tadbir urus yang baik, jawatankuasa pemandu FSB, usaha kerjasama daripada 11 ahli kumpulan kerja, pencapaian penting projek dan pematuhan kepada makasih al-syariah. Muhammad Razwan berkata program itu bertujuan untuk mewujudkan ekosistem kewangan yang mampan dengan memfokuskan pada daya tahan kewangan, pemerkasaan komuniti, tadbir urus diri yang baik dan tingkah laku terbaik. Ia bertujuan untuk menyelaraskan dengan prinsip syariah dan hasil yang diharapkan memberi manfaat bukan sahaja kepada pengendali takaful tetapi juga peserta dan ekonomi Malaysia. Laporan interim itu menawarkan pandangan mengenai kemajuan yang dicapai oleh pengendali takaful dalam melaksanakan 27 inisiatifnya dan penjajarannya dengan matlamat industri. Laporan penuh dijadual akan dikeluarkan pada suku pertama 2025.
Baik, dan sudah bersedia untuk mengulas lebih lanjut mengenai peluasan perlindungan takaful rakyat Malaysia adalah bersama tetamu kita yang sudah bersedia dalam studio adalah Muhammad Radwan Muhammad, Ketua Pegawai Eksekutif Persatuan Takaful Malaysia. Saya nak ucapkan terima kasih Encik Radwan kerana sudi meluangkan masa bersama kami pada jam ini dalam studio dan bercakap mengenai inisiatif ini untuk kita mulakan perbincangan. Mungkin Encik Radwan boleh kongsikan berkenaan mengenai inisiatif program rangka tindakan sektor kewangan FSB takaful, termasuk apa objektif dia dan bagaimana untuk kita fahami sasaran utama dia.
Okay, terima kasih Nina. Terima kasih Niaga AWANI kerana menjemput saya dan memberi peluang pada hari ini untuk menjelaskan dengan lebih lanjut. Pertama kali saya ingin mengucapkan tahniah because rumusan yang dibuat sebentar tadi adalah rumusan yang sangat baik tentang apa yang kita buat. Walau bagaimanapun terdapat pelbagai akronim. WBIT, FSB, program FSB takaful. Jadi saya nak jelaskan di sini langkah journey kita bermula pada tahun 2018 apabila Bank Negara Malaysia mengeluarkan dokumen WBI WBI Value Based Intimidation kepada semua industri kewangan di Malaysia, termasuklah bank, insurans, takaful dan juga bank Islam. Oleh kerana industri takaful merasakan bahawa WBI ni adalah sangat sejajar dengan semangat ataupun konsep penubuhan takaful di mana kita membantu pada masyarakat. Jadi industri takaful telah menyediakan satu rangka kerja yang diberi nama VBIT ataupun Value Based Intimidation untuk takaful. Ya. Di mana kita menggunakan dokumen daripada Bank Negara ini dan mengeluarkan satu rangka kerja yang khas ataupun khusus untuk industri takaful. Dan pada 2022 kita telah untuk mencapai kerana VBIT framework ni adalah satu framework yang secara subjektifnya menerangkan aspirasi industri. Jadi untuk memungkinkan industri mencapai matlamat yang kita ataupun orang kata sasaran yang telah kita nukilkan di dalam orang kata framework tu, kita mengeluarkan satu hala tuju pada tahun 2022. Dan interim report ni ataupun report pertengahan yang telah kita sediakan dan kita lancarkan baru-baru ini adalah untuk menunjukkan di mana kita sekarang. Salah satu benda yang paling utama semasa kita membentuk hala tuju ataupun roadmap WBIT kita tu ialah pembentukan apa yang kita panggil tahap kematangan, maturity continuum. WBIT adalah satu konsep yang agak abstrak di mana kita ingin mencapai for example seperti yang disebut tadi untuk mencapai financial kemampanan kewangan, daya tahan kewangan, stability, untuk melibatkan komuniti, untuk mendapatkan tadbir urul yang baik dan juga tata kelakuan yang baik. Tapi bagaimana kita nak mendapat dan kita nak mengukur pencapaian kita. Jadi kita telah menyediakan satu tahap, orang kata apa, tahap kematangan di mana kita sediakan pada tahap pertama, pada permulaan, nantilah tahap di mana kita telah mencapai 1, 2, 3 dan 4, apa yang perlu kita capai di situ. Jadi secara keseluruhannya semasa kita menyediakan satu kajian tentang keberadaan pengendali-pengendali takaful, kita dapati kebanyakan pengendali takaful berada di tahap 2. Dan dan ada juga yang masih di peringkat atas tahap 1. Jadi aspirasi kita adalah untuk pergi ke tahap ketiga dan kalau boleh mencapai pada tahun 2026 sejajar dengan financial sector blueprint tahap yang tertinggi lah. Jadi di tahun 2022 juga Bank Negara telah menyediakan satu plan ataupun tindakan di mana Bank Negara mensasarkan industri kewangan menjadi penyumbang yang besar kepada menjana ekonomi Malaysia. Untuk penjanaan ekonomi di Malaysia. Ini adalah sejajar dengan proses pemulihan yang dilalui oleh Malaysia selepas COVID. Saya agak tertarik melihat some of the statistik yang Nina tunjuk sebentar tadi, di mana kebanyakan industri menunjukkan penurunan semasa COVID. Tetapi industri takaful dan juga insurans menunjukkan peningkatan. Malahan industri takaful menunjukkan peningkatan yang agak tinggi, melebihi 30% semasa COVID. Dan angka kita juga menunjukkan terdapat banyak minat oleh rakyat ketika itu untuk sama ada menjadi peserta kepada takaful ataupun menjadi wakil kepada takaful, di mana
baik.
Ya.
Sudah tentu ini adalah antara usaha yang baik sekali Encik Rozman, kerana kita tahu ini menunjukkan komitmen untuk menyediakan pelan pelindungan takaful yang lebih berkesan bergerak ke hadapan. Dan bukan saja ini adalah bertujuan untuk ringankan beban kewangan mereka akibat kerugian yang tidak diingini ataupun yang tidak adil, termasuk dengan apa telah dikongsikan oleh rangka kerja FSB, VBIT ni. Macam mana kita lihat rangka kerja usaha inisiatif ini boleh menjadi payung kepada ekosistem takaful yang lebih holistik di negara ini. Apa boleh kongsikan antara progres-progres setakat ini? Okey.
So selepas COVID, di mana kita mula masuk fasa pemulihan, sewaktu itu MTA sebagai persatuan kepada industri telah menyediakan satu plan reformasi industri, dikenali sebagai Islah 23, di mana dalam plan reformasi tersebut kita melihatkan masih terdapat kekurangan di dalam 4 perkara di dalam meningkatkan takaful ataupun penembusan takaful di kalangan rakyat, termasuklah kesedaran, keberadaan, maknanya terdapatkah available produk-produk yang available di pasaran, bagaimana rakyat boleh mendapatkan accessibility produk-produk tersebut, dan juga yang paling penting kemampuan. Ya. Jadi bila kita tengok di situ, Bank Negara juga menyediakan satu guideline perlindungan tenang, di mana di guideline tersebut syarikat takaful dan juga syarikat insurans menyediakan produk-produk mampu milik. Walau bagaimanapun masih terdapat limitasi ataupun limitation in term of produk yang available. Dia sama ada melindungi kematian ataupun kecacatan kekal saja. Walau kita dapati demand daripada pengguna adalah lebih kepada perkara-perkara lain seperti kehilangan pendapatan, perubatan dan segalanya. Jadi rangka kerja ini mengenal pasti perkara tersebut, because rangka kerja takaful ataupun VBIT ialah berdasarkan nilai, bukan berdasarkan keuntungan semata-mata. Ya. Jadi kita tahu bahawa ini adalah permintaan daripada pengguna dan kita cuba untuk menyediakan perkhidmatan tersebut walaupun terdapat kekangan dari segi pricing yang orang kata secara konvensional lah. Jadi dekat sinilah kita nampak yang VBIT telah menyediakan industri secara psikologi untuk bersedia bergerak bersama-sama dengan komuniti, bukan hanya melihat kepada keuntungan kepada organisasi takaful sahaja. Malah kita ingin menyediakan nilai kepada negara, kepada komuniti dan juga kepada industri. Itu adalah teras utama VBIT, di mana yang paling pentingnya ia berlandaskan prinsip-prinsip syariah.
Kita tak nak bring forward the profit but also the value within it. Dan menyebut berkenaan hampir separuh rakyat Malaysia, sebanyak 40% masih tidak mempunyai perlindungan. Apa bentuk pendekatan yang boleh diambil MTA untuk pastikan liputan coverage itu lebih besar, lebih luas seiring dengan melihat kepada potensi yang boleh diterokoi, boleh kita venture dalam industri berkenaan?
Okey. So terima kasih soalan tersebut. Pertama kali yang paling penting kita perlu mengenal pasti segmen manakah yang masih terdapat orang kata jurang perlindungan tersebut. Of course orang kata jangkaan kita adalah golongan yang berpendapatan rendah, B40 atau kan. Tapi kita lebih suka melihat pada golongan yang kita panggil golongan BM40, di mana kita dapat 20% atas golongan B40 dan 20% yang di bawah golongan M40. Ini adalah golongan di mana kita melihat dos remaja ataupun pemuda yang berumur daripada yang mula-mula bekerja umur 21, 19 ke 32 dan keluarga-keluarga muda basically. So ini adalah golongan BM40 yang terjejas semasa COVID, for example, right? Dan tak semestinya kadar penembusan yang masih kurang tu hanya berlaku di dalam segmen ekonomi. Terdapat juga faktor geografi, contohnya penduduk-penduduk luar bandar. Penduduk-penduduk luar bandar dan juga orang kata student ataupun pelajar-pelajar yang merasakan saya mesti belajar, saya tak memerlukan perlindungan. Dan salah satu masalah penting juga di Malaysia ni ialah kita kebanyakan rakyat terlampau bergantung pada perlindungan takaful daripada employer ataupun majikan.
Bukan personal.
Bukan personal. Memang dari segi statistik kita dapati daripada penembusan takaful sebanyak 20% dan konvensional sebanyak 40%, secara totalnya 60%. Tetapi apabila mencapai tahap umur persaraan, kebanyakan daripada mereka yang bekerja dan dilindungi oleh takaful semasa bekerja melihat tiba-tiba mereka tidak mempunyai perlindungan. Jadi itu also adalah satu segmen yang kita perlu lihat. Jadi banyak aktiviti yang kita buat, terutama sekali financial literacy. Sepanjang tahun 2022 dan 2023, pihak MTA telah dan bersama-sama dengan operator takaful telah menjalankan banyak aktiviti untuk meningkatkan financial literacy ataupun kesedaran kewangan di kalangan rakyat. Secara bersasar, kita not only that kita deal dengan consumer melalui iklan-iklan kita also deal dengan orang-orang kampung melalui program takaful masuk kampung. Baru-baru ni kita menjalankan program di Pontian, di mana program sangat berjaya dan dihadiri malah timbalan Menteri Kewangan pada ketika itu, Datuk Ahmad Mazlan, also turun dan juga turun padang dan bersama-sama dengan rakyat dalam program tersebut. Untuk pelajar universiti, kita mempunyai 2 program. Pertama, program bersama universiti private dan juga public, kan? Yang mana kita panggil takaful in campus. Kita menerangkan kepada pelajar kesedaran kewangan mesti bermula semasa belajar, even sebelum mereka keluar bekerja. Dan salah
lebih erat untuk bagaimana memperkuat ASEAN. ASEAN sekarang kan di crossroad, jadi Indonesia dan Malaysia bisa menjadi pilar untuk memperkuat kesatuan dari ASEAN.
So we see a tremendous future for hydrogen to be a part of the decarbonization of the planet. At this point of time, Malaysia and India and where we have been sort of focusing on developing projects.
Seluruh juri memberikan satu nama.
Tekaan juri penuh yakin dan tepat.
Dia merupakan penyanyi tu. No.
Terleraikan misteri siapa di sebalik topeng di pengakhirannya nanti.
Memang sangat luar biasa ya.
Demak Singa Malaysia. Siaran langsung di Astro Warna dan Astro Go. Sertai peraduan misi misteri untuk memenangi TV 4K 65 inci setiap minggu.
And very happy that this is part of our agenda, leaving no one behind in this process. It's quite extraordinary if you think of the global population of about 7 billion people. We still have 10% or 700 million people that don't have access to energy at all. So that has to be a very important part of our equation. I'm delighted we have great diversity on the panel from all parts of the world, which I think can help us take a deep dive in what we're looking at here. We've been through a lot since COVID-19. We saw that drop in demand and a drop in emissions. People got excited about it. And then that recovery that took place, which really strong demand of oil demand of better than 100 million barrels a day. And then you wonder what happened after Russia-Ukraine. He brings that energy security question onto the table here. And does it push out climate? So also part of this discussion is how do you balance out the pathway to net zero by 2050, if not earlier, and still provide energy security for people at the same time and invest in our future to deliver on climate action when there's a lot of skepticism. One anecdote which I thought was interesting, for the first time here at the World Economic Forum, this energy transition and climate is one of the top 4 issues. It's one of the pillars of rebuilding trust in the world for 2024 at Davos, which I think is important. And if you walk in through the main entrance, you'll see the graphic drawing of some of the debate that's taking place here. Right at the center of that graphic drawing here in Davos is all about the energy transition and climate and the concerns about that going into the future. I want to introduce our guests. It's a delight to have them all here. Veronica Nielsen is the General Secretary for Trade Union Advisory Committee, TUAC, at the OECD in France. It's great to have you. Omar Andres Camacho Morales is the Minister of Energy and Mines of Colombia. It's great to have you. He's going to be speaking in Spanish. We have translation devices on your chairs. Go to channel 2 to make sure you hear everything he has to say. Andres Guski is the Chief Executive Officer of AES in the USA. It's a company driven to provide technologies on the energy transition and at scale. Gurdeep Singh is the Chairman and Managing Director of NTPC in India. He's going to talk about the deployment of renewable energy, but actually delivering energy to make sure no one's left behind and what's in his energy mix. And Jennifer Morgan's the State Secretary and Special Envoy for International Climate Action of Germany. Jennifer, I think it's a good place to start because I talked about the impact Russia-Ukraine did have, and it kind of nudged climate awareness or urgency to the side here. And we had to be very nimble as a world to make sure everybody had access to natural gas and not to have an over-dependency on Russia, which is a big lesson. But how do you, what's the lesson learned out of that process, would you say, of having energy security needs to be met and the scramble for supplies and making sure we don't lose the concept of making sure that there's energy access for all here, that no one's left behind in the transition, that is not a dominant force from the developed world or the G7. Please.
I mean, perhaps to start by the German experience in the European Union, and I think what we have work to do is to combine energy security, climate security, and economic security all together. So one lesson is don't be dependent on one country for fossil fuels, or don't be dependent too much on fossil fuels as a whole. Diversify, of course. The other lesson, I think, is to go domestic and to drive up renewable energy. So Germany now, last year, we had a boom year on our renewable energy growth. We have over 350,000 jobs in the renewable energy sector, with over 50% renewables. Europe has increased its renewable energy targets. So renewables and efficiency have been the main response after we, of course, phased out all of our import of Russian fossil fuels. So I don't see actually a conflict between energy security and climate security. I see that you have to hold them in your mind and in your policy making all at once with economic security as well. And then what we've been working to do, because what I'm seeing is a massive geopolitical shift in this moment, because countries that beforehand were not potential powerhouse energy providers of the world now suddenly could be. So the Africa Climate Summit, actually, that happened in Nairobi in September with President Ruto, saw himself and Africa as major providers of the raw materials, but also of the green hydrogen, for jobs for youth in Africa, for economic development. So I think what Germany then needs to be working on is actually partnerships. We have with both Colombia and India quite a lot of work that happens together on eye level, where we're creating local value creation in countries so that they actually are part of this energy transformation that we're now in the midst of, so that we can meet also the goals that we all agreed to at COP28. We agreed to transition away from fossil fuels, and we agreed to triple renewable energy and double efficiency by 2030. So first, think it all together. Also be thinking about the climate impacts. Hydrogen, hydro in some countries is no longer a good base load. Build up, put in the right policies and financing and incentives on the renewables, and then work with partnership with other countries around social ecological partnerships, so that you're thinking the social as well. Different categories, and then I'll wrap up. Obviously, how Germany works with an India or with a Colombia is very different than how we work with Kenya or Africa. At the COP, there was an initiative launched by President Ruto from Kenya, an acceleration partnership for renewable energy in Africa. And that is all about energy access. And now we're looking at how we can drive down the cost of capital in Africa for investments through guarantees.
Okay, very good. I want to circle back with you a little bit later about the dependency on coal because of the shock, and then accelerating permitting for renewable energy at a very fast pace. The LNG permitting to get that project off the ground happened in record time as a result of that shock. I'm going to have everybody grab their headsets, if you don't speak Spanish, to bring in Minister Morales. It's very interesting because a year and a half ago, President Gustavo Petro promised a progressive energy transition from coal, moving away from coal and oil, to have carbon-free capitalism, as he talked about. I'm cognizant of time and having the translation here, but you're pledging no new oil and gas projects. You can live off the existing projects and then make the transition to renewable energy. Is that target too ambitious because of your need for export earnings, number one, but also the need to provide energy to the Colombian people? Thanks.
Sí, como todos saben, no solo se trata
As
de
you
superar
all know,
dependencias
we're not
que hay
just
con otros países, sino también
concerned
superar
on
dependencias que podemos
overcoming
tener con un
dependencies
solo
on other countries, but also our dependency and dependence on one fuel, one single fuel, or one single type of energy. So we've organized this transition process in Colombia for that to end up this dependence. So we're creating conditions for energetic sovereignty, energetic independence, and this is an ambitious project, but we've already succeeded to have a roadmap to plan energetic transition. And I'm talking about exploring on energies, not just to develop hydrofuels, but we want to also explore energies in countries and in a context like the Latin American context, where we have water, sun, wind, and we may use geothermic energy, wind energy, and other renewable energies to face climate change. And this is what we have wanted to do. And we're already going forward to better implement renewable energies and to transform our energetic matrix on the one hand, and also on the other hand, and this is a great discussion, and fortunately the WEF has dealt on energetic transition, and we're talking about an economic transition. We're thinking about guaranteeing other ways of income, and we want to not just develop new energies, but also tourism, food, and other type of energies like green hydrogen. And we want to become energy suppliers for our neighbors and also for the rest of the world. Colombia is in a geostrategic place that is quite favorable because we border 5 countries and we want to connect our electrical grid throughout South America towards the north and have green hydrogen and share it with the rest of the world. So as our president said, not just do we want to progress in extractive fuel. No, we want to end up not needing extractive fuel and have a decarbonized energy. This is our aim.
Great, very good. I'm going to come back to you a little bit later about access to finance, right? The issue about access to finance to be able to make that transition happen, because that's one of the debates we have today. Everybody wants countries, even those that sit on strategic assets and oil and gas as well. Do you have the funding that's necessary? So think about that. Veronica Nielsen, I think it would be a good way for you to come in here and look at how you define energy equity, justice, and inclusivity. What does it mean today, in your view, if you're taking the trade and jobs position on this, which I think would be a good, sober reminder for everybody in the audience?
Thank you very much, John. Yes, indeed. For us, to manage the energy transition and all the other transitions as well, the only way we can do it is through a just transition. You cannot impose changes on people. You have to do the changes with people. And I think that's really important to keep in mind. First, because you need their buy-in of reforms, you need their acceptance of reforms, but also you will get a much better outcome if you do things with people. And that's why trade unions for a very long time have been calling for a just transition. Now, this transition is going to be, or it is already, very, very difficult, because the question is, a lot of jobs will disappear and they will be hopefully replaced with new jobs. But where will these new jobs be created? Will we have enough jobs? So it's a question of quantity of jobs and it's a question of quality of jobs. And I mean, there are some reassuring research saying that lots of new jobs will be created. The IEA has estimated, I think, 14 million jobs in clean energy by 2030. But what about the quality then? There is, for example, research from the US which shows that the traditional energy sector is much more unionized than, for example, new energy sector, and that means that workers usually have better working conditions. Normally they have, for example, better access to training. So there is a risk there. There is also OECD research coming out with I think it's the Employment Outlook next year, which also point to the concern that jobs in the brown sector, which will disappear when they would be replaced, workers might not earn as much as they do now. So all these are really important issues that need to be taken aboard. And then we have the whole issue of supply chains. I think we all agree that it's great having electronic cars. That's good for the environment, right? But when you do electronic cars, you also use a lot of raw material, metals, which exist in countries where violations of human rights are very regular, happens a lot. And just one example, Madagascar, which is, for example, a country which is terribly impacted by climate change, where you have droughts, places where you can no longer cultivate food, which means people starve, and they then turn to trying to extract minerals, metals from mines. These are not regular jobs. This is just what they do, and they don't get properly paid. They don't get enough pay to have it, to even have a full meal throughout the day. So I just want to raise this because when we talk about a just transition and how to do the just transition, we must remember this because, as I said, it looks very good on paper. Yes, electronic cars, but how do we produce these electronic cars?
I'm glad you brought it up. I'm going to pose that question a little bit later in terms of the mining that needs to take place, whether it's in Colombia or other countries around the world. It's 7 times the strategic minerals and metals that are needed for the energy transition. Nobody likes to talk about it. And the permitting, for example, in North America and Europe for that sort of mining activity can take a very long period of time, which just slows down the transition as well. Gurdeep, I'd love to bring you into the conversation because India, which I've had the chance to do a documentary on the energy transition there, and I know the abundance of coal, but I'd like to call India, with a population of 1.4 billion people, the all of the above country, because it needs all the energy it can get its hands on. In that context, can it still hit the targets for 2030 on its renewable targets today? With the other issue I did raise is whether you have everybody having access to energy and accessible. And I think that was a major benchmark and target by the Modi administration. Please, just be cognizant of time. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. I think there should not be any doubt that by 2030, what are the stated objective of 500 gigawatt of the non-fossil capacity, we are working on that. And as of today, we are having almost 175 gigawatt of the renewable energy, which has already been commissioned. And we are well on track, including our company, which is playing a leading role in that, both investing on our own as well as procuring the power and in turn selling the power to the distribution companies. And as far as the access to the electricity and the energy, clean energy, I think India has shown the way. In the last decade, we have added more than 100 gigawatt of the capacity in the renewable itself. I'm just, but our needs of the energy is really increasing. We are registering almost about double-digit growth in the electricity consumption, which cannot be met only by the renewables when the storage solutions are not affordable at present, neither reliable nor. So it will take some time. So we will have to, during this period, we will have to rely on all the sources of energy. That's whether it is coal, whether it's oil, gas, hydro, solar, wind. And tomorrow we are also working on the further steps on the green hydrogen and green chemicals, green ammonia.
Good. If I can follow up very quickly, what's the mix in your company of coal compared to the other energy sources you were talking about?
See, at present, we have around 75 gigawatt of the total installed capacity. Out of that, we have the non-fossil of around 6.5 gigawatt. But at the same time, there is 8 gigawatt, which is under construction. And every day, there is some capacity which is getting commissioned almost on average. So by 2030, we will be achieving 60 gigawatt of the renewable energy capacity on that side. So
it's growing fast. What's the percentage of coal today is what my question was.
See, as a country, we are having almost around 426 gigawatt of the capacity, and out of that, 206 gigawatt.
Still pretty high percentage, right? It's come down substantially, but still high.
Yeah, so what has been declared by Honorable Prime Minister that by 2030, we will have the 50% of the capacity on the fossil and non-fossil on that side, and which is the work which is in progress, and there is no doubt that we should be able to achieve that. In addition to that, there is a lot of work which is going on the energy efficiency side, and we are the country which has shown way how the equitable access to the clean source of energy electrified. We electrified almost around 28 million houses in the period of 18 months. So today, every household in the country is having the access to the electricity, and on an average, they are getting almost around 22 hours of the in the day.
Great. You know, I raised the question earlier about this balance between energy, equity, justice, and inclusivity. Andres, I would love to hear it from a private sector point of view. What does that mean to you? We had a debate today within the center with other partners that baseload energy should be almost a human right, and we don't see it that way because we're leaving people behind in the 21st century, which I find pretty extraordinary. Yeah. How do you define it here from AES?
Well, what I'd say is first, you know, when we talk about sort of equity, right, what will be the effects of climate change? They're going to fall most upon the people who are poorest and most vulnerable. So I think in this whole debate, we have to have a sense of urgency of how are we going to address this. So, in our company, our mission is to accelerate the future of energy, because we really believe that we really need new technologies in many senses to address this problem. So if you just extrapolate, like you brought up, today's technology, doing what we're doing today, and try to triple renewables by 2030, there isn't enough stuff. There isn't enough transmission, there are not enough minerals, etc. On the other hand, I'm very optimistic, because there are so many breakthroughs being made on materials, on using more intelligent systems, more intelligent buildings, that we can get there. So when we talk about electrifying those who don't have electricity, I think that too much is sort of status quo thinking. We don't need to build transmission lines out to these people. Today, you have efficient solar energy and you have batteries. And you can give them 24/7 on a localized basis, and it's distributed energy. So you don't have to rebuild what we had before. I mean, think about something like telecom. The first country to have a fully digital network was Chile. Why? Because it had a pretty bad one, and therefore it had to build a new one, right? Think about telecoms in Africa. It's caused a revolution in business. The business solutions were done by Africans. The build-out was done by African entrepreneurs. It wasn't basic that the OECD had to come and give them enormous subsidies to do this. So I think in the electric revolution now, one of our principal roles is to create the killer apps in technologies, more efficient solar, more efficient and cheaper batteries, and make sure they become available. So I'm not arguing against, providing funds for adaptation and helping get these things kickstarted. But I think we're underestimating two things. One is the urgency of the problem in front of us. Second of all, that's the most unequitable thing that will happen. It will fall upon the most vulnerable. Second, the importance of the role of technology and new solutions. Because again, if you just take today's grid and sort of tell countries to rebuild what you have, is not the most efficient. It's going to take too long.
Okay, very good. I want to bring the polling question up, if I may. So if you want to grab your mobile phones to take a look at the QR code so you can vote along with us. You can bring up the slide again for us here behind the scenes. And also, can we bring up the polling question at the same time? Thanks. So what do you see as the most pressing energy equity issue to tackle? You can look at it as in the plural or the singular. Energy access for all, which we talked about before. Affordability of energy for all. Jobs in the transition, as Ms. Nielsen talked about, resulting from the energy transition itself. Consumer and community engagement in the energy transition, and reducing the divide between the developed and the developing nations in energy transition. We're in Aspen Room 1, if you've taken a look at that QR code, and I'm going to go ahead and let you vote, and we'll talk when the voting is complete. The other thing I wanted to bring up here is the danger that we're not able to finance this energy transition for the global south. And I would imagine Germany has its eyes on it. It's collaborated, as you said, in different parts of the emerging markets of the world. Do you want to address that, State Secretary?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, financing is fundamental, and I think there's many different components of it. I think one of the first pieces is that countries have the fiscal space to be able to invest their own funds in solutions, whether they be in energy, whether it be on more resilience, and that has to do with the debt burdens that countries carry. We're actually working with Colombia and Kenya and France right now to be looking at different financing mechanisms and debt swaps, as well as participating in many conversations about this, because this is something we've heard as a major priority from developing countries. So I would like to put that here in the midst.
That was, again, an issue at COP28, was it not? It was like, how do we accelerate the green finance funding that's available? Loss and damage is not replenished to the targets everybody wants to have, but there's money deployed. But to Andres' point, how do we accelerate this process?
But just to say, I mean, I think this year, so we have to bring down the cost of capital, right? And we have to look at the guarantee mechanisms that could come in to bring down the cost of capital. It costs 8 times as much to put in renewables in Africa as it does in Europe. So this is another piece where we have a very fragmented landscape in the financial world, where we need reform of the international financial institutions because they're not fit for purpose right now. We need to leverage private sector finance. We're not doing that well either. And of course, we need to continue on developed countries providing the financing. Finally, this year we could report, or the OECD confirmed, we'd met the 100 billion commitment, but we need the trillions, right? So we need to be putting in place, in a way, the finance ecosystem in a way where finance and banks are more fit for purpose for the crises that we have today, whether it be on building resiliency in energy systems, which is also an equity issue, whether it be providing the financing for renewables, whether it be providing the fiscal space and dealing with some of the debt issues and getting the infrastructure invested. So Global Gateway from the European Union, 2.3 billion coming in on renewable energy infrastructure, that's all part of the mix. But this has to be the year that we turn the tide on this.
Yeah, so pretty virtuous. I just want to go to the poll and then I'll come back to you, Andres. Thanks. What do you see as the most pressing energy equity issues of our times? Energy access for all at 51%. It's quite interesting. Affordability of energy, which came up during the crisis, it hit everybody in their pocketbook. Inflation remains a problem and energy prices remain high. And a third think that we should reduce the divide between the developed and developing nations and the energy transition. I'm not sure if you agree with this one, Ms. Nielsen. Jobs transition resulting from the energy transition doesn't take a high priority. No, you've got to step up your push here, and consumer and community engagement in the energy transition. I think there's also an education part of this transition as well. If you need 7 times the minerals to get to electrification that everybody wants, do they really want all this mining activity around the world or not? Gurdeep, what do you take away from the poll? And we'll go to Andres afterwards. Thanks.
No, I think it is quite clear that energy access to all, and that to also the clean source of energy, I think that is important. And then that can only happen, I believe, through the deepening the grids and then greening the grid. Yeah. We will have to work towards that. Each and every citizen, each and every person on this earth should have the access to the clean source of energy. Otherwise, I think whatever we are doing, that will go on increasing the divide between developing and developed nation anyway.
Good. Your thoughts, Andres? You wanted to weigh in on this distribution of financing as well.
Yes, but I want to say, I think we have to have a more nuanced discussion. Because the most, say, people who don't have electricity today, and typically in Latin America, it's like more isolated communities. So we've actually done, for example, demos where you put in solar, you put in batteries, and you can provide, that's the cheapest system-wide. But they need help to be able to even pay for that. Yes. So I would say that a more nuanced approach to direct subsidies for those who can't pay, because developing nations aren't uniform. You have wealthy people, you have wealthy businesses, so why should they be subsidized? So really, how do we target the subsidies for those who really can't pay would be my first. Second, to more nuanced discussion, in most places, renewable energy is the cheapest energy. Okay, let's stop that discussion. That is true. It's not the cheapest capacity or dispatchable. It's not 24/7.
It's not the base load that we were talking about.
Well,
right?
what I would call it is a dispatchable. That sort of, because, you know, you could have a lot of sun someplace. So you have 12 hours guaranteed. What do you do on the corners?
Right.
So that's what I call the capacity or the dispatchable energy. So that's the real problem with renewables. It's not renewables per se. It's how do you take care of the corner? So batteries can do that to an extent on a daily basis. But they're still relatively expensive. That's why we need cheaper batteries to make this really what you call in tech sort of a killer app. You may have to continue to run your gas plants or other fossils, or if you have hydro. But I think we need a more nuanced discussion because there's only so much money. It should go for those who really can't pay. Second, renewables are basically the cheapest energy. So let's focus on the problem. The problem is really the capacity. How do you get that dispatchable energy at the corners when the renewables aren't there? And I'm very optimistic about what the technologies can get there. I'm very worried about the discussion, which is very status quo.
Yeah,
and very, you know, renewables aren't competitive. Well, it's just not true.
It's not true.
Good. Ms. Nielsen, I want to go back to you on this sense of urgency. I was a bit surprised that we wasted quite a bit of energy on the language of the communique at COP28, and we're kind of ignoring the elephant in the room where we need about $4 trillion a year on the energy transition. And if I have my numbers correct, depending on which sources you use, It's about $1.5 trillion invested in energy today. So there's a shortfall on the top line number. Does it frustrate you we don't take the sense of urgency on the transition, and then you have a crisis like Russia, Ukraine, and it gets pushed back a little bit? Please. I'd like to open this up to the floor as well.
Yeah, of course, because I think this is the biggest challenge we have. This is really an existential crisis for humanity, and it's certainly taking far too long. The result of COP28 is disappointing, and the issue you just discussed about financing, yeah, we don't see really finances coming through. And the pressure we put on developing countries, because we say you're not supposed to use fossil fuels, you should use renewables, but what about ourselves, and how can we demand that of countries that need to develop? So yes, no, indeed, I can only agree. But I can come back later, but I'm also happy to give you a few examples of what we can do as trade unions, as social partners, to negotiate agreements, because I think there are lots of good examples on local level, sectoral level, national and international level. But every situation is different as well. And when we talk about a just transition, we have to go into the details of the policies, of the actions, the measures. We can't just talk about these broad headings. It really needs to be detailed plan what you do. And for example, you have social dialogue at the local level. Just to give you one example, in Italy with the energy company ENI, the 3 Italian trade union confederations have made an agreement on how to introduce the energy transition. So that's one way. There's also a very interesting example from North America with the North America's building trade unions that signed an agreement with the Danish offshore company Ørsted, which is also how to create new jobs in renewable energy, and how to do this. You allow workers to organize, and you have well-paid jobs. So there are lots of things which can be done at the local level. Then you bring it up to the sectoral level. There's also an interesting agreement from Spain between governments and social partners how to phase out coal. You have the national level. A number of governments have set up these kind of authorities to deal with the just transition. Canada, Australia, Scotland has the Just Transition Commission. And then you also have the international level, for example, with the International Energy Agency. They have put together a labor council where they invite trade unionists from all over the world to have regular consultations just to discuss how you can do the transition. So I think there are lots of things to be done, but of course financing is desperately needed.
Okay, I'm going to take one more question on that point. So thanks for making my transition a little bit easier here to Minister Morales. I wanted you to give some thought to the access to financing for a country like Colombia. And can you answer at the same time whether you're willing in this new administration, very progressive administration, to answer the call for the mining assets? Are you willing to develop them despite the policies here to have less dependency on natural resources? Be cognizant of time, and then I want to take some questions from the floor.
Pues primero, parte de lo que
First of
está
all,
ocurriendo
part of
es la
what's
necesidad de
happening
desarrollar
is the
vehículos
need to
y mecanismos
develop
más
vehicles
rápidos,
and
que aceleren el proceso de
devices that will accelerate the use of resources like for the countries like ours, and so that none of us are left behind. And for this, we need to improve mechanisms so that we go faster. But as you already said, we're working with Germany, France, and Kenya to get fiscal spaces so that public administrations may help. So that we need to change the subsidy plan for other types of energies. And countries like ours, the country of beauty, is going on this roadmap, but we need to do more, and we need the help of other countries. We need to accelerate the process so that we are not left behind, and we need to keep up the pace of countries. I mean, we take 26 COPs to discuss energy, but we don't have so much time, and so there's the whole minerals that are strategic in the discussion. So we have the minerals for transition in Colombia, so we need to make efforts, and what we're developing is knowledge of what we have and the potential. In Colombia, we're developing developing a geoscientific plan to have sovereignty over what we have, so that we know what is in Colombia and what are the rules of game in Colombia, so that we can develop an energetic transition in favorable conditions for all, and so that no one is left behind.
Great. Thanks for addressing the mining side of it as well. I want to see if there's any hands for questions. I want to, Pradeep wanted to weigh in, but any questions from the floor to get into the debate, let me know and we'll get a microphone to you. Pradeep, you wanted to follow up on that?
Yeah.
Come to
John, the main issue is meeting the demand of the electricity as per the requirement of the consumers. And this is not only the base load, but the peak demand, meeting the peak demand is the major question. And that is going to take little longer. What Mr. Gluski just mentioned, unless there is a battery prices or the other sources of the storage, like the pump storage or tomorrow hydrogen, with electrolyzer cost has to come down almost by 1/3 or 1/4. Otherwise, meeting this or leaving no one behind is going to be looks to be dream with the only renewable energy. So we will have to work. There is an urgency that we find the solutions so that the storage solutions start coming in. And that is very, very important. So the grid is available and reliable.
Good. How do we get this urgency, Andres, in a sense? Yeah. I was kind of defining it as a global moonshot. You know, when President Kennedy said that he wanted to be there in 8 years, it did happen. But why don't we take that sense of urgency when it comes to the transition?
I'm kind of fascinated by, I mean, we just had the hottest year on record. We're almost at 1.8 degrees, and we're talking about keeping it at 1.5.
Yeah, there's not realism in the conversation, right?
Well, I think it's a little bit like the story of how do you boil a frog? You do it little by little, and he never realizes he's boiling. And so, unfortunately, we're not very good at responding to longer-term crises. So getting to it, yes, we definitely need a greater sense of urgency. And I think that we need a more frank talk between the business sectors, between the scientists, and between governments. Because I think that honestly, we tend to speak to like a particular audience, and there's not enough sort of cross-boundary thinking. You know, like, just give you a case, people like to talk about how many billions are invested. Well, what about the efficiency of use? What about better utilizing existing resources? Electricity is a strange market. You have no buffer. You build for the peak demand. The peak demand could be 1 hour a day. And you have all these transmission assets, all this iron, all this copper, all this steel. And transmission is the main bottleneck in building out renewables. Well, how can you better use the transmission? So we have a big project in Germany, actually one of our companies, Fluence, where we're bringing North Sea wind. We store it in batteries. We ship it over the existing transmission lines off peak hours. And we're able to bring it down to the industrial load in Bavaria. That saves you decades and $1 billion in avoided costs. Well, some businesses, it's not in their interest to avoid billions of investments because they make a cost plus return. That's the truth. But also efficiency of use. So when you project out like you did, we're not going to get there by more of the same. So we have to be more efficient in the use. We also have to better utilize existing investments. We have to target, I think, the subsidies, and also have a frank discussion of what's the problem of investing in the developing countries. Many times it's security being paid. So I think, you know, international organizations take a case like Haiti. You know, you have the Dominican Republic next door, which has gas, which has ample electricity. It could be the fastest way of providing more electricity to Haiti. The problem with Haiti is people don't have credit. So a mechanism where, say, you know, you had sort of a credit guarantee, if they didn't pay in X days, you could go get paid, would allow you to immediately start responding to the terrible situation in Haiti. So what I'm calling for is like, we need to be more creative, all of us. And the business sector also has to be more frank in its discussions and bring in the scientists. Because I also hear things proposed as solutions, which I don't think makes science sense, honestly, from looking at energy conversions. You know, so that's where I would come out, is we need a franker discussion and raising the level of, let's say, sophistication of the discussion we're having.
Good. Yeah, I want to follow up with you, Jennifer, and actually address this idea that you touched upon. It's the international lending institutions at the same time. There was concerns about using ESG principles, so a lot of the U.S. capital couldn't be deployed to hydrocarbon projects in Africa or Latin America for natural gas, which many see as a transition fuel. And should they be a little bit more innovative to provide a guarantee for Haiti, the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, the regional development banks, which were reluctant to deploy to hydrocarbons on Africa until we had a crisis in Russia and Ukraine. So there's a bit of energy hypocrisy at the same time. What are your thoughts?
Well, maybe just to start at home, because I think the points I wanted to pick up a little bit on the inclusion piece and the process and the stakeholders. And I mean, Germany has a coal phase out, right? 2030 coal phase out that we're aiming for. And my point is, it's all about how you do it. You can do it, but you need to have the leadership there. You have to be inclusive. So we had a coal commission. We brought in the unions, brought in the states, brought in business, brought in the environmental activists, got a recommendation, put it in place. Now you have in what our major coal area was of mining, 18% unemployment a number of years ago. Now it's like the Silicon Saxony with 3,000 new companies, many new jobs in Germany. And that's just one example. So you have to be deliberate about this and how you have a social, and I think thinking the social and the ecological together, both in our own countries and how we're doing that, taking the lead and making that happen is absolutely critical. And then you have enough credibility, I think, to be working with other countries, because we've learned a lot on what's worked and what hasn't worked. We have a flexible grid. We're working on flexibilizing our grid, right, which is part of our answer to the storage. We have days that we're 100% renewables now in Germany. So I think that's one piece of it. My second comment I wanted to bring in was on the COP, because I have a different view. I've been to all the COPs.
Good. Just watch your time. We have 3 minutes left, just to
3 minutes of the whole session.
Absolutely. We could go for another hour.
We could. So I'll make one sentence. I think that we are at a moment where there was a very clear signal that came out of the international community to transition away from fossil fuels and move to renewable energy. I think we know a lot. I think we'd be creative, bring in the different stakeholders, and make it happen.
Okay, very good. Gurdeep, we have limited time here. One thing you wanted to weigh in earlier in our discussions today was having a voice, a unified voice for the Global South. They all have a priority on getting access to energy here, but how do we make sure they do it as efficiently as possible, to the point that we've learned a lot in the Global North, making sure that we put the best practices in place, but how do we accelerate their need for energy, but to do so as cleanly as possible?
I think it came out very clearly that access and availability of the clean source of energy, that is electricity, is essential. And the security is paramount. It's important that people can get the power when they need. Otherwise, all this will become kind of theoretical. And every country will have to devise its own strategies and own ways. There will be remotely located locations which don't require the wire to go that wide. And we have done those kind of things also, where we have provided solar solutions. But at the same time, it is essential that we go aggressive on the renewables and go on integrating. As I said initially, I think we have to deepen the grid, and then we have to go on aggressively to green the grid. There is no other way. And we will have to, till then, we will have to go on relying almost all sources of energy, with the main focus on the transition. So the security first, and then the transition the next.
Good. Do you agree with that, Andreas? To wrap us up here, leaving no one behind, can we do so and give energy access for all, but accelerate the space?
I think it's almost like a basic human right.
Yes.
So we have to do it. I don't think it's, and can we do it? Absolutely, we can do it. Can we do it efficiently? Yes, but it takes, targeting, subsidies, using the latest technologies. I just want to make a comment. There's a in the talks, it's a little bit like the Global North is going to provide all the technology for the Global South. Don't count them out. We've developed a lot of technologies in the Global South that then we ended up implementing in the North, because there are scientists there, there are great engineers, and there might actually be conditions which are more favorable. So I would say...
And they know the local landscape.
Yes, so, well, actually, they've helped us, for example, energy storage. The first large-scale energy storage using lithium-ion battery was in Chile. And then we're now in, I think, 40 countries. So it's a two-way street. Don't count the creativity of the Global South out.
Okay, very good. This has been broadcasting around the world live. It'll be available on the websites, but we've been out on the top link site for the World Economic Forum. You'll also find it on YouTube and Twitter, and we're using the hashtag of WEF24. We'd love to hear your feedback on this very important topic. Our thanks again for the Center for Energy and Materials for convening this discussion with such diversity at the table. Thank you for addressing some of the more sensitive issues politically, which you have to navigate in Colombia as well. I'm John Defterios of NYU University in Abu Dhabi. My thanks to this panel and for all the participation here. Thanks very much.